focus text today comes from the Gospel of John, chapter 8, verses 1 through 11. While Jesus went to the Mount of Olives, early in the morning he came again to the temple. All the people came to him, and he sat down and began to teach them. The scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery, and making her stand before all of them, they said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the very act of committing adultery. Now, the law of Moses commanded us to stone such a woman. Now, what do you say?" They said this to test him, so that they might have some charge to bring against him. Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, "Let anyone among you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." And once again he bent down and wrote in the ground. When they heard it, they went away, one by one, beginning with the elders, and Jesus was left alone with the woman standing before him. Jesus straightened up and said to her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" She said, "No one, sir." And Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go your way, and from now on, do not sin again." We grew up learning who the bad guys are, how to identify them, what they look like, what they sound like. Maybe you've never thought about this before. So here's what I want you to do. Take a moment and think back to your childhood, your parents. Your parents, as perfect as they were or still are, they intentionally or unintentionally taught you about the bad guys. I'll give you an example. My parents ingrained in me not to take shortcuts, ever, which meant that if you had a job to do, you did it well, you did it right, completely, fully, no excuses. Because if you didn't, you'd be a slacker, one of those unreliable, lazy people, and you don't want to be that. Those my parents identified as slackers were just one of the bad guys. So I want you to do some self-reflection. If you have children, who were the bad guys that you taught your kids to identify? Me? I'll be honest. I taught my kids that spoiled, entitled individuals were the bad guys. Yes, I have expectations of you girls. No, I'm not going to do that for you. I don't care if your friends' parents do that for them. You are not one of those spoiled, entitled people. I taught them to make value judgments about certain people. In our focus text that we read today, you know who the bad guys are, right? If you've been in a Christian faith community for any length of time, you learn pretty quickly that it's the Scribes and Pharisees. They're always the bad guys. And if it wasn't clear from the story that they're bad, well, geez, then it's definitely clear from the pictures people have painted, drawn, and created of them over the years. Here, just look at these people. They're obviously bad. Look at those shifty eyes. You know someone is evil if they have shifty eyes. Look at the scowl, the resentment in that face. Even pictures for children sometimes show how bad these people are. The anger and self-righteousness, oh my gosh, it's just oozing out of them. That's gross. Look and see these people who are at home in the shadows, who lurk in the darkness. It's pretty obvious that this is the face of evil according to the biblical story. These are people that you really don't want to associate with. But thankfully, because they're so bad and they're so easy to recognize with their shifty eyes, scowls, and dark presence, we can avoid them. So I do have one more picture for you to see. It's quite fascinating. It took some searching, but I actually found a modern picture of these Scribes and Pharisees. It's not a group picture, it's just one person, but I want you to compare the similarities of this modern picture to the ones of the past. Look closely. Yikes! Oh my gosh! What do you think about this character? He doesn't exactly have shifty eyes or a scowl. I don't think he radiates a dark presence. In fact, he looks, well, dare I say, kinda handsome. But don't be fooled by appearances. This is still a picture of the scribes and Pharisees. Like the scribes and Pharisees, this person is intrigued by how we come to know, understand, and experience what humans call God. He is a student of the biblical story. Like the scribes and Pharisees, this person has seen how religious traditions and spiritual practices can benefit individuals and communities. Like the scribes and Pharisees, this person has come to learn and embody the expectations of his culture and his religion. He has been taught about right and wrong, good and evil, and is quite confident that his ideas are right and that God would agree. Like the scribes and Pharisees, this person eventually came to see Jesus for who he really was. Like the scribes and Pharisees, he looked out into his community, out into his life and the world around him, and he saw people who did not think as he thought and did not do as he did. People who his parents and faith tradition warned him about through their stories. And like the scribes and Pharisees, it was so easy for this person to look down on those people for being ignorant, out of touch, and so very wrong. And finally, like the scribes and Pharisees, this person was shocked one day to find Jesus embracing the very people who he knew were so wrong, inappropriate, bad. Like the scribes and Pharisees, self-righteous indignation filled him. And in those moments of his life, he found himself far away from God, stewing in his own anger. Really? This could be a picture of any one of us. Over the centuries, this group of people, the scribes, the Pharisees, have been vilified to look like these low-life, bottom-dwelling religious zealots, when in reality, these individuals look very much like me, they look like you, and anyone whose expectations have been unmet. Anyone whose worldview has been turned upside down and challenged by someone else. This could be anyone who has been appalled by another's actions or way of thinking. When someone challenges you, when someone challenges your worldview, your perception of right and wrong, like the scribes and Pharisees, you don't stand idly by and say nothing. No, you do something, directly or indirectly. You make it right. You teach your children how bad these people are. But here's the question for you today. What if it's Jesus who offends your sensibilities? What do you do then? Our ministry here at Bethlehem, everything that we do, our vision, our mission, our worship services, our website, newsletter, the service events, the forums, everything that we do can be boiled down into a few words. And I know that can be dangerous because oversimplifying is never good, but I'm gonna take a shot at it, okay? As a community of faith at our core, we are trying to come to terms with God's love, God's grace, and God's mercy. Sounds simple, maybe too simple, but it's not. Coming to terms with, making sense of, understanding, and embracing God's radical sense of grace, mercy, and love can do nothing but change and challenge the way that we see ourselves, others, and the world. So changing directions just a little bit here. We'll come back to the bad guys in a second. But I want to ask you another question. What do you do with something that breaks? Honest question. What do you do with broken things? More often than not, we throw broken things out, right? We're in a place now as a culture where items are manufactured to be disposed of. It's planned obsolescence. Our landfills are full of discarded broken things, and yes, not every broken thing is discarded. Some things are fixed. However, regardless of whether the broken thing is thrown out or fixed, we do not do broken well. Broken is bad, broken is wrong, broken is dysfunctional, and it's really not tolerated within our space. Not quite convinced of what I'm talking about? I see the same mentality applied to people. In our culture, people who are broken physically, mentally, financially, spiritually, or in some other way are often made to feel less. The broken among us feel shame, isolation, loss, and grief. Have you had a conversation with someone who is no longer able to live independently? Have you tried to convince an older parent or family member that it may no longer be safe for them or others if they continue to drive? Have you had that conversation? For elders, even this suggestion is an insult to their dignity. I'm not broken, they say, while at the same time feeling shame because they know that they can't do what they used to do. Think about relationships. I know there are outliers, but for the most part, when a relationship ends, it ends. And the person who was at one point a blessing to you is thrown out of your life just like another broken thing. There's a reason that the self-help industry as a whole brings in $10.5 billion each year. These books, seminars, podcasts, coaches, and programs all promise to fix what we perceive is broken in us, which is good because broken is bad. We don't tolerate broken. We never have. And so, the scribes and the Pharisees, they bring a woman who they see as broken, one of the bad guys, to Jesus. Charged with adultery, she has broken the law in Deuteronomy 22. Her community and family relationships are broken. And now the scribes and Pharisees want to get rid of this broken thing according to the law of Moses. Jesus' response to all of this? He says, "Let anyone among you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." In other words, let anyone who is not broken condemn her. I need you to understand something. One of the most controversial things Jesus does in his ministry is to help others become curious, question the stories that they've been told, and challenge the notion of having bad guys in the stories that we tell. In our stories, the bad guys are always broken. There's a fundamental defect, a problem that either needs to be fixed, or if it can't be fixed, then that person needs to be disposed of. So we take the bad guys, the defective, and over the centuries we deal with them by stoning and burning at the stake and imprisoning, deporting, shaming, excluding, shunning, mocking, scapegoating, and discriminating against. We make life hard for them so that we don't have to deal with their brokenness or bad influence in our lives. During Lent, we follow Jesus to the cross, and in doing so, uncover the brokenness in our own lives and in the world. We can't pretend that it's not there, but in embracing our brokenness, something begins to happen. We develop greater compassion, empathy, and tolerance for others, and we come to accept our limitations and slowly begin to come to terms with God's love, with God's grace, with God's mercy. The scribes and the Pharisees are not the bad guys. They are religious leaders who are trying to do right by their community and follow the law that God has given them. Where they come up short is where we all come up short, believing that broken is bad and that brokenness should be fixed or removed altogether from our lives. In doing this, they cannot be curious about others. They miss seeing the extent and the depth of God's love for all people and for creation. How many people do we write off because we think that they are broken because of their political beliefs, religious beliefs, views on child raising, what they say, what they do? How much time and energy is spent focusing on your shortcomings, your brokenness? How much stress and anxiety does that create in you? In this season of Lent, may you come to terms with God's love, grace, and mercy, so that you may see yourself and others how God sees, as loved children. This is the good news that we hear today. Thanks be to God for that. Amen. As a way of going deeper into the story of our faith, I invite you now to reflect on some reflection questions. You can pause the video, write these down, talk about them with a partner, however you want to use them to benefit you. But question number 1, growing up, who were the bad guys according to the stories of your family and culture? Are you able to identify them? And question number 2, how are you doing coming to terms with God's love, God's grace, and God's mercy?